Thank you very much, Lisa, and thank you in particular to the fantastic young people for an amazing afternoon. So a journalist asked me recently, why did I think that finally people were talking about sort of the kind of issues, in particular FGM, that were raised during the play. And I said, for the first time, we had young people's voices in the debate. And actually what you illustrated this afternoon was that is exactly right. It is changing the terms of political debate and discussion in this country, that we have your voices being heard with such clarity and with such insight. And I just wish I could tour your play everywhere, because it was really brilliant and it touched on so many issues and brought them to life. So thank you and congratulations. We formed the all-party parliamentary group on FGM in December 2011, and FGM Orkanu here and her organisation provide the secretariat to that group. There's more than 50 members of Parliament and members of the House of Lords are members of that group, and we try to make sure that we do more action than we do just talking. But I think we've come quite a long way actually since we formed the group. An awful lot was going on before that, but I think what we've hopefully managed to do is speed up the pace of change and discussion. I looked up, and 10 years ago in Parliament, FGM was mentioned less than 5 times in a year. And 5 years ago, I think it was 10 times. And then in the last 2 years, it's more than 30 times. So we've actually, certainly in parliamentary terms, trying to bring FGM as an issue. And I think actually I was quite intrigued by some of the other issues, in particular the issue around CAT. That was very interesting. We've debated that quite recently in Parliament. And so I'm going to look forward to looking a bit more into that and understanding where that fits into this jigsaw of difficult issues. But on FGM in particular, we really have, I think, begun to talk about it far more. On Monday of this week, the NSPCC, with support from a whole range of brilliant organisations, some represented here today, launched the first ever 24/7 national helpline on FGM. Not just there for young people, but also there for all those frontline professionals which, as you so brilliantly illustrated with your input into the casualty script, need to understand more about these issues if they're really going to help people. So the NSPCC survey, some of you saw recently, showed that 3/4 of teachers don't even know what FGM is and haven't had any training on it. So we've a long way to go, and the fact that such a respected organisation, which 2 years ago when I met with the NSPCC didn't even have FGM really on their agenda, and they've now absolutely stepped up to the plate and taken that forward. So that's a really big change that's come forward. Some of the other things were around getting some proper funding, and actually the government announced about 2 months ago now the biggest ever single pot of money for tackling FGM, £35 million, which any country has ever announced. In Parliament on Monday, we're launching a 3-year study into a community programme, and they're going to announce their results of working with people to look at tackling FGM. Because what we've got to do now is understand what works and then do more of it. And we also need to lift the lid on the issue, and again, that was what your play did so brilliantly. But we've now got engagement from a range of ministers. We're not quite there yet. I'd like us to be able to get into schools everywhere in the country, as well as Bristol schools are tackling this issue. So what I hope comes out of events like this and your play and all the other discussions you have is ideas about what really works on the ground, how we really get down to the grassroots, we change behaviour, we challenge behaviour, and we protect girls. And that, for me, that's what this is all about. We have to all step up to the plate, all of those of us in a position of responsibility. And we know that, but we also need insights and help from young people like those who presented the play today, which only they can give us. And that's why they're so valuable. So please don't ever hesitate to say what you think would work and what you think we need to be doing more of. I'm more than happy to be challenged. As I say, I think we've made some progress, but we've got an awful long way to go. But with your help, I think we can get there. So thank you.
Firstly, I'd like to thank Jane for all the political progress she has motivated since our last meeting. We'll be sure to send her a list of things we want done this year.
Absolutely fine.
We are here to discuss the realities of violence against women and girls, otherwise known as VAWG, and the terrifying subject of female genital mutilation, abbreviated as FGM, and the challenges we face to protect women and girls in the UK today. We are here to remember that VAWG is not just a political buzzword, but a serious, concrete problem that all movements should work to combat. As the Education Secretary, Michael Gove, Every student and teacher I know would dance in the streets if Prime Minister David Cameron replaced him with someone like Jane, a person who listens to and understands young people's needs and knows about the obstacles we face in our fight against VAWG. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel experts and young people. International criminal barrister, Felicity Jerry. Bristol University's chaplain, Kalsoon Bashir. Designated safeguarding nurse, Jackie Mathers. Activist, FGM. Bristol City Academy students, Faduma Douale and Mahad Maximin. And finally, my name is Mukhtar Hassan. I'm also a City Academy Bristol student and will be chairing today's discussion. I will open the floor to any questions in the last quarter. Okay, our first question is to FGM. What are the main types of violence facing women and girls in the Western society?
It's quite broad. And I must say that I'm very pleased about the play, in the sense that it put FGM in a broader context of violence against women. And that is where we need to actually place the subject so that people understand about this. In terms of most of the violence against women is similar around the whole world. In Western countries, we still have sexual violence, rape. We still, at the moment, we are grappling quite a lot with trafficking. We've seen lately in the press the issue of grooming. They are all part of it. Domestic violence, which cuts through all social classes and across cultures. Genital mutilation, it's also global now, and it's all part of the control of women and women's bodies. But this is just a few.
Do you think our patriarchal society perpetuates VAWG?
Exactly, yeah, it does. If we look at Western societies, for example, you just have to look at the papers and look at the objectification of women in the papers, pornography, which then reduces women to bodies which can be used anyhow. Domestic violence is still very, very strong, and it's not just to do with the underclass. We recently saw something in the papers of Sachi throttling the wife. So it's still very, very strong. And we should not think that violence against women or FGM is just something which is to do with women in developing countries and out there, and we're just going to solve, because it's with us every day.
Kalsoon, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I think you've really described well some of the challenges facing women, and it's not just right across the world. You know, what really stupefies me is that we're living in a country with very good laws protecting the rights of women, and yet some of these atrocities are happening right here under our noses. And there can be no justification. And unfortunately, you know, there are individuals that use religion as a justification. Now, Islam is not misogynistic, but human beings can be, and often use religion as an excuse to perpetuate the atrocities upon women. And we really have to fight those. You know, religion can be interpreted any which way an individual chooses to do, and I hope I'm working with women across the country in challenging very patriarchal, misogynistic interpretations of faith that gives men the right to commit those abuses against women. We have to, you know, as a practicing Muslim with 4 children, I would not be practicing this religion if I felt that it did not give my sons and daughters equality and justice. I would walk away. Why would I? You know, this is a religion. The first word is read. And that is a clue. We have to educate ourselves and those around us in knowing what their rights are so that they can stand up to those injustices themselves.
Felicity, could you please give us a brief explanation of Clare's law and tell us whether you think it's effective in combating domestic violence?
Well, Clare's law allows you to find out about somebody who's associating with your women and children. I think perhaps the best point that I can make is slightly not going to answer your question, but what I liked about the play today was that it demonstrates that you can talk about vaginas. And certainly as a criminal barrister, I have to talk about vaginas and penises every day. And frankly, it isn't funny, but for decades we've had this great British reserve that we don't talk about sexual matters, or we don't talk about cultural issues, that's somehow some issue that we don't address. And I think what's really important and demonstrated by today's play is that what goes on in the criminal justice system is meant to deal with what goes on in people's homes. And FGM is abuse just the same as any other sort of abuse that I have to deal with in the context of what I do. So I don't think you can necessarily limit things to Clare's law. You have to look at the laws against FGM, the laws against violence against women, and how we're approaching those on a daily basis.
I guess but the whole cultural sensitivity thing, the fact that people are too scared to be called racist, I guess that's the thing. One, we're talking about vaginas, and two, I guess the reason why people even do is that, it's in religion, when it's not. And I guess people are too scared to say, hey, what are you doing? And I guess people are like, it's not my problem, I don't want to get involved, it's not like people like me get it done.
Felicity, why is FGM classified as a separate offence under the FGM Act 2003 rather than the Child Sex Offence Act?
Well, I think at the time that the legislation was originally implemented, which frankly is originally 27 years ago, it was put into a separate category to try in many ways to raise awareness. But it was dealt with and debated at a time when it was considered to be separate from any other form of child abuse. I think in the sense of raising awareness, it's quite a good thing to have a separate statute that can deal with FGM happening here, or international offending when children or young girls are taken abroad and cut abroad. So I think historically the way in which the legislation has come about has been as a result of the development of our awareness of what is going on.
I think the challenge we have with FGM is the fact that it happens to minors, most of them under the age of 10. So between 6 and 7, some even under the age of 5. So when we expect them to come forward, that's going to be difficult. And the older girl, if she comes forward, gets to the stage where she feels comfortable even to come forward, there's the problem about the community and members threatening her. And I will say that in my own working experience in the last few months, we started off a media campaign with the Standard, and the young women who even started disclosing the kind of threats, including death threats that family members and community members put these pressures on them. Even if somebody comes forward, they will withdraw the case. Then lastly, I think that the only way we will be able to have prosecution is to take the burden of reporting from younger women, and actually get the medical professionals are seeing FGM and they are not reporting, and they should be reporting. So we take the burden of other younger people to report. Then finally, in terms of And that is what we are working very hard. The DPP has just finished the task group. So in September, as part of the work that is being done, he's going to report. And he's been looking at other aspects of the law. So threatening people because they disclosed about FGM, there are parts of the law we can use. And also, we've looked at aspects of the law like domestic violence. You know, sometimes when the Met Police has quite a lot of cases, but they withdraw. So if you withdraw the case, maybe we can go forward with it, even when you withdraw. And then lastly, I think it's to do also with parents' culpability. Because most of our communities, whenever they are asked question, who did it and all that, they always eject the whole thing back to relatives, extended family members. But it would be very interesting. There are parts of the law which makes parents responsible. And it would be interesting to find out whether community members, family members would continue to say, oh, it's somebody, extended family member who did it or put pressure. Because once we put the responsibility to guardians and parents, they will take that responsibility.
Can I just come up? Do you mind if I come back on that for a moment? I think I entirely agree, and I chose my words very carefully when I said people coming forward as witnesses, because there are all sorts of people that are going to know if something's going to happen. Of course, the best form of prosecution is crime prevention, in a way, if you can stop it happening at all. So there are all sorts of people who can come forward as witnesses. That they are doctors, health workers, teachers, but also ordinary people. If other people know this is about to happen or going to happen or has recently happened, the child doesn't necessarily have to be the main witness in the case. Cases can be proved on circumstantial evidence, and I think that's why I gave you the example that I did, because you can prove a killing where the main witness is dead. So if you can do that in any murder-manslaughter case, you can do it in an FGM case. You just have to have Facebook records, computer records, telephone records, and other witnesses. All of that type of evidence is the sort of thing that the DPP has been considering. I think the point I just wanted to make is if you do have to go to court as a witness or as a victim, then the process is not quite as you would imagine it, that it can be done in a sensitive way.
Jackie, why don't medical practitioners systematically gather and publicly share statistics of women and girls who have had FGM?
I think you've raised a really good point, and sort of picking up on something Ethel said as well about medical professionals need to report this. They can sometimes only, report it when they actually know what they're looking for, and that sounds really, really strange. But I'm an adult nurse, I'm a children's nurse, I've got a community qualification, I've done 9 years training, I'm very long in the tooth in being in the health service. I didn't know anything about FGM until 2006, and I have been working with affected communities. So practitioners sometimes will only know what they are taught. So we need to start backwards by making sure all our medical professionals, our health visitors, our midwives, all know about FGM, and that is in their basic training, so that when they come out, they're not just trained from Bristol because we're talking about it here, and they're from Bristol University, because those nurses will go and work in London, Manchester, Liverpool, and we want everyone to make sure that they've got the same basic knowledge and understanding. And then when they pick up on a case, they know that they have that duty to refer, and they do. When it's child protection, this is against the law, so they do have a duty to share, and that's part of the training we're doing.
Why is training in identifying type 1 so inadequate?
Well, to be crude, we've already talked about vaginas and penises, so the difficulty is actually finding a clitoris can be very difficult. when you're looking at anatomy. It's not the most obvious thing to see and identify. And even some very experienced obstetricians and gynecologists, we have recently found out, have found it extremely difficult. And it's really, if some are more aware of FGM, then they will be looking for this. I hesitate to say that, but having just recently looked at a case where 3 obstetricians and gynecologists looked at a particular young person, and only one of them could identify the type of FGM that had happened, I feel I do need to go back to the drawing board with a lot of our professionals.
Should it be legally required that medical services gather and share such statistics, and how could this be enforced? Felicity.
I think at the moment there's a real push for this in the collection of evidence, the training of medical professionals. There's some cracking Home Office guidelines that are now out there. I think it is the responsibility of teachers and healthcare workers to tackle this.
If you are writing your list to Jane Ellison of things you want done this year, it may be something you want to consider adding in there, that actually at a national level, if government asked for statistics from midwifery services about how many women had been presented who were cut or were closed, then actually I think that would be the biggest steer, that we would get some national figures. At the moment, this is done on a local level by informed, passionate individuals, and we don't have a universal picture, even in Bristol. And I think that would be the best health direction if you wanted to put some efforts into it, and we would very much stand behind you.
Are all clergy members across the UK CRB checked?
Are all clergy members? No, I wouldn't have thought so, because CRB, Criminal Records Bureau, it's designed to check people who work with children. So not every clergyman or woman or every religious person works with children. So I think the answer to your question is probably no.
But there are some imams or priests that might work with children. Do you think that, is it required of them to be CRB checked?
Yeah, if you work with children, that's usually the way it works, yes.
Look, Tam, can I, again, sorry, so I'm coming back. Something you might want to look at is the fact that if they haven't been CRB checked, because what Felicity was saying, maybe you want to find that they've got a commitment to child protection and violence against women and girls, and that religious leaders have got unified policies on that. There are some faith groups in Bristol that have that, and there are some faith groups that don't have it, and it would be worth making sure that there is a sign up of those that might represent affected communities.
We do have it is good practice for mosques to have carried out CRB checks and be aware of, but I think at the moment there's nothing to enforce that, so if they're registered charities and things like that, they will have an obligation to, but some may not be, so I think it would be worth the law having a tighter hand in that.
The work which has happened up to now is mainly because civil society organizations are pushing government to do something, and it shouldn't be like that. So every step, like the NSPCC helpline, you would like to, you should be able to be very proud to know that Nemo, Ali, and myself, 8 months ago, we were the ones who went to see NSPCC. I had already gone to see them in 1992, which they throw the issue out that it has nothing to do with them, but obviously now they are prepared, and with Nemo, she was the major force actually saying you must do something about it. That's how it started. The community initiative Jane talks about, it's again from Rosa Fund, Esme Fairbairn Foundation. They bring it together to try to support community groups working on it. It will be launched in Parliament, and parliamentarians will claim it, but it's coming again from civil society. in terms of health professionals, professionals like Jackie and all that, they are individual health professionals or teachers or whatever who takes that initiative. But something which is as serious as this, from an activist point of view, it should not be coming from a civil society pushing government and pushing everybody to do something about it. There has to be leadership right from the top, which requires performance from local authority, and that is only the time that we will see FGM being treated seriously. So I just want us to, as we discuss this, to see that in spite of a lot of words and, you know, posturing and all that, FGM is not treated seriously, although it's happened to thousands and thousands of our girls in this country.
I think it's about time we have the questions. I think it's about time we hand the questions over to the audience. So, Zed.
I think there's been a rise in sort of Islamophobia quite recently, and there's a lot of stereotypes perpetrated in the media about Muslims being violent and anti-women. Obviously, this isn't a religious thing, you know, it's not part of the scriptures. But I wonder, how do we, is there a fear that if we start talking more about this and trying to solve this issue, that we'll be playing into the hands or in any way encouraging Islamophobia and therefore actually making it a harder problem to solve? I just wondered what the panel's views are on that.
If I can come into that one, I think we've all got a responsibility to address that. In Bristol, we've got a group called Wise Women. They come from a Christian background and a multi-faith background, and they are subject to FGM. They come from affected communities. So we're very clear in all of the training that we deliver that this is not across one religion, because otherwise it would be in all Islamic faiths and not just in affected communities and affected countries. But I think we've got to allow the fact that we've got people from communities who are standing up and are talking about this, the ability to talk about this. I think we would be doing them a disfavour and a disservice if they stand up and maybe perceive to have one type of faith that puts them in that role of being Islamic. That's the person receiving that information, because they don't know whether they're an Islamic person or a Christian person. They're making assumptions, and it's for us to make sure at every level, and I'm not talking about me as a professional, it's us as communities, us in general public. If we're hearing someone talking about it, don't walk past, challenge them. FGM is everybody's business, like child protection is, and FGM crosses all communities. It's practiced in Christian communities, Jewish communities, and Muslim communities. So this isn't an Islamic problem.
And violence against women, you know, goes across all communities and all cultures and all religions. It's not specifically a Muslim issue. And just as I commented on the grooming issue, you know, within the BBC there was a culture that was, you know, was complicit in allowing Jimmy Savile and his cronies to do what they did. But who commented on their religion? Nobody did. But we have to acknowledge that it did happen, and questions, I hope, will be asked within the BBC, that what allowed, you know, employees of theirs to abuse children and young women. And similarly, within pockets of the Pakistani community, there is a culture that regards all women as second-class citizens, and we have to, within our communities, question that culture and challenge it, and that's the work that we have to do. Now, you know, coming from a Pakistani background, I wasn't aware of FGM, and there are, you know, other cultures within the Muslim community that were not aware of FGM, that now that are aware of it will speak up against it as it being an Islamic practice. And, you know, the media will put whatever spin they like on it, but we as human beings have to stand up against injustices no matter what religion we are and challenge it, and that's all we can do, really.
It's a
Lucy, I think she made a really valid point that 20 years ago some legislation was brought in, and it was brought in isolation. And as the police, you know, as a row of police and a row and a half of police, I promise you every case we get in this city is investigated until I can't think straight anymore and until my team can't think straight. And what we need now is some supporting legislation. I agree, we want people at the very top talking about it, but we want more than talk. We want some action to put some additional legislation in place that just puts in the infrastructure to allow the police to go to health, who I have to say are exemplary in this city, in the form of Jackie Mathers. And we just need those other things. A piece of legislation in isolation just doesn't do enough. And we have to streamline this issue, or mainstream it, so that we are talking about it, so that it isn't that whispered conversation, so that when I talk about it to women at my Zumba class, they don't all fall down in a faint and then have to get back up. You know, and I do think when we get those other pieces of policy and this, that and the other, that just, we are one set of people. And what I would say as well is all of us are child abuse specialists, and we will always put the welfare of that child first. And if that means giving up a prosecution because we are going to put that child in a worse place than they were when we started, I would stop doing this job tomorrow. But I promise you, every case here we put our absolutely best resources into it. And we will continue to do so. What would be very nice now is some public health policy and some change at the highest levels around demanding statistics and around establishing the prevalence, so that we get a bit of weight behind not enough committed individuals, really. So that wasn't a question at all, sorry.
Can I just say, as Mayor of Bristol, I am so proud of what's happening in this city and the young people especially who are taking action about this. I want you to know that I do everything I can to help raise the profile, and I thank Nimco Ali in particular, who was the person who brought this to me in a very vivid way. And I want to make quite sure that I do everything practical as well. So it's not just about raising the profile, although that is something I can continue to do. So I want to make sure that every officer who is engaged with anything that might be able to impact on this issue is aware of it. I want to make quite sure that all the departments, education and social services and everybody are absolutely aware that we use our influence in the schools, those schools particularly that we are responsible for, but across all the schools in Bristol. But I just ask, is there any one practical thing that you would like me to do next week, apart from throwing tens of thousands of pounds at it, because I don't have that? But any one practical thing you would like me to do next week? Thank you.
What the practical thing that you could do, I would have every head teacher and every head of your local health departments into your office and tell them what you've heard today. That's what you can do on a practical basis that doesn't cost any more than a cup of tea, frankly.
Thank you.
I wanted whether you could consider asking the health and well-being boards what are they doing about FGM, because I think a lot of the problems I've seen on the ground is the accountability, because they don't need to, it's not on the agenda, they don't need to feed back what they are doing. If they say they have policy, if there was any way that you can get some performance management in terms of local authorities accounting for what they are doing, it will really move the issue forward.
Although today Integrate is demonstrating its work promoting FGM, I think the lesson to be learned from the work that young people do is that the training they're given empowers them to speak out and empowers them to take responsibility for their lives and lives of others. And I think this peer education approach that is used by Lisa Zimmerman and the others, whereby all the young people are responsible for deciding what we do, how we do it, and the results are delivered by the young people, that's the secret of the effectiveness of our work. It isn't just because it's FGM and important, it's because of the methodology empowers the young people, particularly the young women in Integrate, to speak out for themselves. And those of you who've seen members of Integrate on Newsnight and other programs will testify to the confidence they've gained through the work they're doing with our projects. So this is the secret, and it's the empowerment process and the peer education which I would like to see other schools doing much more effectively, so that the young people are able to identify the issues that affect them and to take real action to put them right. That's the lesson of Integrate, not just FGM, although that's very important. It's the process through which this has been achieved, which will have results many wider fields than just FGM.
This time we really have run out of time, and I'd like to ask for one round of applause for all our wonderful panel members.